Welcome to the SIWIKE podcast, the only podcast that shares the stuff you didn't know you needed to know about jobs, careers, and life. The SIWIKE podcast, the stuff I wish I knew earlier.
Hi everyone, welcome to the SIWIKE Stuff I Wish I Knew Earlier, the podcast. I'm your host Luki, and for today's topic, I thought we'd go into interview preparation. So you might have listened to the previous video of resume prep, and as part of that, I encourage folks to reverse engineer the job posting. And if you use that approach, then actually what you're doing is doing some inherent interview prep. Because what you're doing is taking the job posting and saying, for this qualification, what experience have I had best demonstrates my ability to do this. So you've actually already started thinking about the job posting and how your experience is relevant. So from an interview prep perspective, all you're doing is taking that and now practice saying it. Because the interview process is a little bit interesting where you're actually more of an actor or an actress in that process. You're a performer in there. And what you're trying to do is convey your experience in a way that sounds beneficial for the employer. Now, the interesting thing is that being good at an interview doesn't necessarily mean that you're good at the job, and vice versa. Just because you did poorly in an interview doesn't mean that you're not good at the job. But unfortunately, it's part of the recruiting cycle, and you have to get through being able to convey and communicate yourself and basically sell yourself in a way that the employer thinks that you'll be able to do a good job. So interviewing is a skill, and you need to practice that skill on an ongoing basis. And what I recommend folks is to take the top interview questions from Google or whatever, and to print them out, cut them up, and put them in a little bowl. And then every day, tell me about yourself and use your smartphone and record yourself. Tell me about a time when you demonstrated leadership. What are your greatest weaknesses? What are your strengths? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? All of those common questions, practice to the point that you are really good at it. And a couple things that you want to look for when you practice are things like eye contact. So when you are looking at your smartphone at your camera, the camera are the eyes. So are you looking into the camera, the camera and the eyes of the interviewer? Or what you could do is look at yourself in the video, so at least that you're looking solidly in there. Or are you looking around and looking elsewhere? Because some people have that tendency. So you don't necessarily want to have 100% eye contact, but something in the range of about 70, 80% would be good. So you can look around and look away a little bit, but ideally you're focused a little bit more on the eyes. A couple things that I look for is are you smiling? Do you feel like you enjoy being there? Because if you think about it, if someone is interviewing and has a lot of energy and is smiling and has enthusiasm versus they're like this and they're answering a question and they have almost like a deadpan look on there, who would you rather work with? Would you rather work with this guy who has a little bit more energy and enthusiasm? Or would you rather work with this guy who really can't articulate himself very well? Now, the second guy might have a very solid technical answer and might be able to do the work, but you probably wouldn't want to spend your lunch hour or any team events with that person necessarily, right? So practice things like smiling, practicing things like filler words, ums, ers, ahs, and those are a very challenging piece to get rid of. If you join something like Toastmasters, they actually have an counter, which keeps track of all the ones that you say, so you can hopefully improve. Now, for me, it's been a challenge, and I still do quite a few of them, but I'm much better than I was before. So can you get rid of filler words? And the reason being, especially if you have a lot of them, the ers, likes, ums, they become distracting. So what you want to do instead is, when you notice you do them, pause instead. So 1 second pause, 2 second pause. Instead of saying for 1 second, then say for 1 second. And that's just generally a natural part of speech. So getting rid of filler words. Actually answering the question. Believe it or not, sometimes when you think you answered the question in your head, then you didn't actually. So what I encourage you to do for that one is to do the question, and then when you review and watch the video, do it the next day. Because there's a difference between what you said and what you thought. And oftentimes when you watch it right away, you're like, oh yeah, that was a good answer. but when you watch it the next day, the thoughts in your head at the same time are not there. So you only get to hear what was actually said. So if there's no context, or if you didn't put a certain amount of information, then what you thought was a great answer actually doesn't make sense. Practicing making sure that you answer the question is important. And sometimes the question, the interviewer might have worded it in a different way, and you picked up a keyword and then answered based on that, not realizing that some of the other sentences or parts of the question will change it. So sometimes you hear the word, well, tell me about your approach to leadership. So you talk about, oh, leadership. And you'll say, oh, I was a leader in this company. I had a role doing this, and you talked about an example of leadership. Because you heard the word leadership and you ask that and you answer that question. Now, the question itself was, what is your approach to leadership, right? Which that example might have explained it, but not necessarily. So you have to make sure that you listen to all of the words that they say and answer the question appropriately. Oftentimes it starts by even listening to the question, because a lot of folks, when they're asked a question, before the person is even done asking the question, they've already started formulating an answer. So what you want to do is practice reading the question, understanding the question, and then answering it, versus formulating the question as the question is being asked. So making sure that you answer the question is another one. And then thinking about, how do you end your response? Because sometimes people will have an answer and then they'll stop talking. And then it becomes a little bit awkward, because the interviewer doesn't actually know whether you're done or you have more to say and you're just thinking. So if you have a way to end the response, it can help them move to the next question. And the simplest way to do that is to restate the question. So if the question is, tell me about yourself, then you say whatever you need to say, and then you say, and that's a little bit about myself, or that's why I feel I would be a great fit for the role. If they ask about an example when you had to deal with a difficult team member, you answer the question, and then you say, and that's an example of how I dealt with a difficult team member. So just restating it is the simplest way to answer or to close off a response. And for those who are familiar with the STAR, the CAR, the SHARE model, that's a framework to answer behavioral questions. And what that is tell me about a time when you demonstrated leadership or teamwork, when you had to deal with a difficult person or anything of that nature, or some sort of example, right? And I like using SHARE because to me it's the most complete. SHARE stands for situation. So give me some background, some details. Were you the lead? Were you reporting to someone? Which company? In what context? Give me some background. The H is the hindrance, the problem. Give me some information about the problem. Was something broken, something out of alignment, something, whatever it is? What is the problem? And you want to spend a little bit of time on this, because if it's a big problem, then it's more impactful to your experience. But if it's a small problem, it's not as impactful. So spend a little bit of time explaining that. And the A is the action. So what did you do? So sometimes there's a project or a group thing where you've done a bunch of things, or the team did a bunch of things. So you can talk about that, but also include what was your individual contribution. So you can say, we did a bunch of things and I did something else. And that was my contribution to that. So what is the action that you took? And then the R is the result. What happened? Did things end up well? Did you end up helping that angry client? Did you end up completing that task? Did you end up doing whatever it is that you were supposed to do? And what I encourage you to do is make sure that you end off on a positive note. So even if it was a difficult person, if you got laid off as something, then, well, how did you recover from that? And oftentimes that's helped with the E. The E is evaluate. So basically, what did you learn, or how can that be of help to the company and the role? So connect it back to the company and to the role, and see, how do you add value? This is very important if you're a career switcher, because sometimes the example that you give might be in a different context, in a different light, and sometimes the interviewer might not understand how it correlates. But if you can specifically say, and I feel having that experience would allow me to be able to do the job of whatever it is a lot better, then you can make that specific connection and connect the dots for them to make them easy to understand how you fit. And then you'll also want to close it off and that's how I demonstrated whatever, or that's an example of whatever, just like we did before. So thinking about those things, so your eye contact, things like smiling, answering the question, and then also closing off are some things that you want to consider for doing interview practice. So as you practice those questions, some of the questions that you want to ask yourself are the top questions that are out there. We also talked about reverse engineering the job description. And then what I encourage you to do is ask those questions again, but in the negative, right? And what that means is, tell me about a time when you demonstrate whatever that first bullet is, and something went wrong. Tell me about a time when you demonstrated the second bullet point and something went wrong. Because oftentimes employers will ask you about what you did and how you did it, but also how you overcame challenges when you felt something went wrong and you had to correct it. What are some of the things that you did? Because it's great when everything's going well, but sometimes it's the people who are able to push through difficult times that they want. So answer it in the default ones, the requirements in the positive and in the negative, and then also do it based on one or two of your best examples. So maybe you worked in 2 or 3 places, and answering all the questions from place 1, place 2, place 3, place 4, place 5, and doing it once for place 1, 2 for place 2, and a third time for place 3. And not all of those requirements would be applicable because you might not have done it. But challenge yourself to say, okay, if I had to answer this question from my last work experience, from my 2 work experiences ago, from 3 work experiences ago, how could I answer it? And it forces you to kind of get out of your comfort zone and test yourself on how well you can really answer the question. And then answering again from your strengths. So pick 3 strengths that you have. So maybe you're detail-oriented, you're a people person, and you're very analytical, right? So answer all the questions again from being detail-oriented, from being a people person, from being analytical, and again, the whole point is to practice asking yourself these questions from all sorts of different angles. And when you do it in all sorts of different angles, then you'll find that you're much more prepared because all the questions that they're probably going to prepare are going to be likely to come from the job posting. So doing that will give you a stronger sense of preparation and build yourself into a little bit of a package that you can take and give it to the interviewer on the other side. And then at the end, what you also want to do is make sure you have a couple of questions for the interviewer, right? So go onto their website, Google them on the news page, and figure out, well, what's happening for the company, what's happening in the industry, what are some interesting points that you have. Is the company very much into education or the environment or corporate social responsibility? Was there a new innovation or a policy or something that recently came into the industry? Asking questions about that. So having at least one, probably 3 questions is what I recommend, related to something to express that you're actually curious, that you're actually interested in the role. Because when I was an interviewer, one of the things that I didn't like the most was when we asked, well, do you have any questions for us? And they said, nope, because that person didn't even seem like they were interested in the role. But if you have a couple questions, ask the question. And what I often recommend is, so let's say you're asking a question about some new innovation or new acquisition that happened in recent news, then what you want to do is listen to their answer and then ask them a follow-up question for that answer, right? And what that does is it expresses true interest, because you're not asking the question just because it came up on the top 10 questions to ask an interview list. You are asking the questions because you're actually interested, because you actually want to work at the company. So having 1 or 2 or even more probing follow-up questions would be good. And that necessitates that you actually listen to the answer and the response. And then one question that I encourage you to ask at the end is to ask, what are the next steps and when can I hear from you? So as 1 or 2 questions, just so that you know, are they going to make a decision in a month, in a week, in a day? You'll hear from them tomorrow, hopefully. So those are some of the things that I encourage you to do from an interview prep perspective, is to take a look at the job posting and reverse engineer it. Practice using your smartphone and looking at basic things like eye contact, smiling, filler words and all that. Then practicing the questions from multiple angles. So be it the positive, be it the negative, be it the most relevant experiences that you've had, the strengths that you've had, and answering yourself the questions from multiple aspects of yourself so that you can really convey yourself in a good light for the interviewer, and then making sure that you have great questions for the interviewer. So that's some SWIKE, the stuff I wish I knew earlier about interviews, and hopefully you found that useful and that you'll join me for the next episode. Thanks. Thanks for joining us on the SWIKE, Stuff I Wish I Knew Earlier, the podcast. If you like the podcast, please subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you found this podcast. And if you can give us a review, that would be very appreciated. Feel free to contact me on LinkedIn at Luki Danu, LUKIDANU, and the same on most social media platforms. And I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks. Bye.